Friends, Kris here. You've heard of Water's World? Well, this is Kris's world. Thanks for being in my world through the prism of Chrism, through the prism of the lens of my iPhone. Now, we've been talking on Jonah this week, the inside story. Somebody said Jonah was a little down in the mouth. I guess he was swallowed up by a fish. But today I want to ask the question, whose fault is it? You know, when Jonah went down into the ship, went into a deep sleep, and then a big storm arose. Now, the sailors on board were not Christians or Jews. They had a superstitious heathen religion and equated the storm with being evil. Now, they asked in verse 7, they wanted to know whose cause this evil is come upon us. And it really wasn't evil. God's the one that designed the storm. So don't automatically equate the storm with something bad. God is good. If God sent the storm, then it's going to be good, and good's going to come out of it, because Romans 8:28 says all things work together for good to them that love God. But we do ask with them, whose fault is it? Number one, I want you to know up front that fault finding is not fault fixing, okay? You know, in the last administration, the economy got really bad, and somebody said it's Bush's fault, it's Bush's fault. Others said it's Obama's fault. Well, fault finding is not fault fixing, and if you're fixing blame, you're not fixing the problem, okay? But sometimes it is a person's fault. It's your fault, it's your fault. We always say that. You know, when little town of Ai defeated the Israelites, it was somebody's fault. They lined up the tribes and ultimately singled out Achan because he had stolen a Babylonish garment and had hid a wedge of gold in his tent, and it was his fault. But normally, you're not looking for fault. You're looking for a reason. So second, quit looking for fault. Start looking for the root of the problem. It's good to get to the root of the issue. Now, there are 4 different types of storms in the Bible. You know, when Jesus was asleep on the hinder part of the ship, the storm came and he rebuked the wind and said, "Peace, be still." That storm was the devil's fault. But on another case, when Peter got out and walked on the water in the midst of the storm, you can't blame that one on the devil. That was God's fault, if you're going to fix fault, because God was trying to use the storm to perfect a person's faith. And then sometimes it's not the devil's fault or God's fault. It's just the reality of the world we live in. In Acts 27, a storm came to Paul, but it wasn't anybody's fault. It's like the bumper sticker on the Redneck's pickup. Let me edit this. Stuff happens. Sometimes it's just the world we live in. But fourth, there are times when it is an individual's fault. If it's your fault, you have to own up to it, and like the publican, beat on your breast and say, "God be merciful to me, a sinner. It's my fault." Psalm 107 verse 17 says, "Fools, because of their transgression, are afflicted." Sometimes it's my fault. But third, finding fault or finding the root of the problem is not to fix blame and shame, but it's to redirect frame and aim. You know, if there is a storm, it's not to condemn you, it's to change you. And so in Hebrews 12 and verse 11, "No chastening for the present seems to be joyous, but grievous. Nevertheless, afterward," and this is what you have to think about, is what's coming out of this storm. "Afterward, it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to them who are exercised thereby." So in Jonah's case, the storm was an attention getter to wake him up and get him back on track. So number 4, I've got to close with this question. What are you supposed to be doing that you are not doing? A couple of verses later, the mariners asked Jonah, "What is your occupation?" Well, he's a preacher. "Of what people are you?" He's of the Jews. He's not superstitious heathen like them. He's separate. And he said, "Of what country are you?" And he'd have to answer, "I'm from Israel." In other words, I have a high calling of God. I don't belong in this ship asleep in the storm. I belong on the roadway to Nineveh with a Bible in my hand to go preach the gospel and do what God called me to do. So if there's a storm in your life, he may be wanting to get your attention and draw you back to the thing that he's called you to do. If that's the case, then say, "Lord, I'm ready. Throw me over the gangplank if you have to, but I'm ready to obey God." God bless you. I hope you're enjoying this series. Like if you like, comment if you want to. Share this with a friend, and tune in tomorrow to Kris's World as we learn more on Jonah. Have a great day.